Hello, my name's Peter Gray. Welcome to January 2022's Writing Arborist Report, or WAR. Today we'll be continuing our look at arboricultural impact assessment reports. So here's Mark Hartley with today's session of WAR.
Whilst you're hunting for that, let me ask those that are here. So what do you think the whole purpose of writing an arboricultural impact assessment report is? Anyone?
Yeah.
Go for it, David.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Well, it's in most cases it's a council requirement for a proposed development. And it's it's basically, I'll talk at the top of my head here, but to see what's on site, what's worthy of retention, what is on adjoining sites that might be impacted by the proposed development, and the way forward to manage what's on site before, during, and following the development. So, yeah.
Okay, so that's nice in theoretical terms, but in real practical terms, why do that? Let me ask a different question.
Yeah,
David, when you write an arboricultural impact assessment report, how many times do they do what you say?
I have to say, Mark, I've not been in the consulting game for that long, so I haven't done that many because of the time period. I haven't been able to see that many through. Quite often, it's just a box ticking exercise where you're just saying the retention of the tree is not compatible with the proposed development, and it's. And I haven't had enough to say, oh, they've done a fantastic job, especially on the more curly ones where you might have some really interesting stuff happening. Yeah. Yeah.
Look, I found it very difficult, and I've had an array of clients. I've had a council multi-story car park right beside a council chambers, and that sort of got halfway done. I mean, it was a long way for them to walk outside the office, I guess, and look over the edge. I've had it where everything's been done right, and that's a rarity for me. And I'd say most times it is what you say. It's a box ticking exercise. It's something that we've got to do, and then we get the next stage along, which is the adherence to it. I mean, certifiers sign off with it. The consent authority signs off to it, the court signs off to it, and then it's sort of, well, it's okay now, we can do whatever we like. Has anyone else found that sort of experience?
Can I add a couple of comments?
Yeah, sure.
First of all, I've noted that council arborists think the report's just written for them, and in fact I think it's quite important for owners of trees on neighbouring properties, because in Melbourne anyway, generally speaking, most trees on the site are demolished, and the remaining trees are actually the neighbours' trees, which we have to look after. Secondly, we've got a couple of councils in Melbourne who strictly make us appoint a project arborist, and if I'm so appointed, then I certainly enforce what I've written in my management statement, but also I've got seniority on my side, I think, and gain a bit of respect in that way, whereas I think younger arborists might have trouble forcing builders to do what they're told.
Yeah, look, my experience is slightly different, Rob. The person gets consent. Oftentimes it's not the person that's going to be doing the building. It's, there'll be a developer behind it. They'll get an approval and they'll on-sell it. Sometimes they'll do it themselves. And it's about a box ticking process. I would say probably 5% of the sites that I do a development site for will actually go through and follow the plan. About 5% will go some way towards complying, but won't do what they're meant to do. And I'd say probably 90%, it's the old 3 panels of fence up, and we're obviously protecting the tree because we've got 3 panels of fence up. Although I do share the experience of seeing 2 fence panels where they used an excavator to bend the fence panels, save money on panel hire and panel purchase. So you can get it down to 2, but usually it's 3, sometimes it's 4. And I don't consider a metre off the trunk or half a metre off the trunk as appropriate for most species. I mean, something like Phoenix palm or a Syagrus, go for it. But for many trees, that's not an appropriate protection area. And I take your comment, Rob, exactly to the point, is that it's often viewed as a document we're writing for the consent authority. And it is a document we write for the consent authority. But there's a whole second audience, and that's the people that are going to implement it on the work site. And we don't do quite as good a job as communicating to those individuals. In fact, sometimes we do an appalling job. There's a trend in Sydney, and I don't know why it's there, of doing an arboricultural impact assessment report without a tree protection plan drawing. So there's no drawing. And it's approved by the council. There's often no specifications. It's just, this is what's going to happen if you're too close to this tree, you need to be further from this tree. And then all of a sudden the building's approved, and the next question is, well, I need a tree protection plan. I say, well, just shift the building. Oh, you can't, it's already approved. Okay. So I don't know where that's come from, but it is something that has stuck its head out quite a number of times more recently. And so I think every arboricultural impact assessment report should have some specifications on how the trees are to be protected, and should have a drawing that illustrates it. And the reason it needs a drawing is it doesn't matter how you go with words, you cannot describe what it is that you want to have done without some form of illustration or some form of plan. So I think that plan is critical in the process. And Peter, I know you include a plan on your reports.
Yes, I do.
And
so what I find, though, is oftentimes with urban developments, there is work required to be done within the tree protection zone. So you can't protect the whole of the tree protection zone. You're only able to protect some of it. And it's a bit of a trade-off as to how you can get as much protection as you can and still allow the building work to go on.
Yeah, it is. And in fact, you've just raised a point that's interesting, and that is we use the word tree protection zone, and we use it for different things. We use it, tree protection zone 12 times trunk diameter, tree protection zone what will actually be protected during the development site. They're not the same thing. The terms are very different terms.
So if you provide a drawing showing the location where you want the fencing to go, and that's reasonable, then often you'll get it done. But if you make it unreasonable or impracticable, then the builders just won't do it because they're going to build a building.
Yeah, look, and again, I mean, I make it so they can get a bobcat down the side and, so between a building and a tree protection zone, if the tree protection zone would have extended through into the building, I'll put a load sharing or a load bearing surface in. Load sharing is just lightweight, load bearings engineered for heavy vehicle traffic. So that'll be something like drag plates or road plates, those are things. Load sharing will be something like plastic road plate, mulch combined together. And I'll allow that to get access past. But again, if I thought about the number of times I've actually saw that happen, I had specified it, I guess, for about 4 or 5 years before TAFE had a unit that was implemented tree protection plan, was the unit, I think, back about 10 years ago. And they said, can you teach this unit? And I said, sure. can I get some plastic road plates? And they said, talk to Kennards or whoever. And I forget who it was, but one of the hire companies said, look, if you're going to use it for teaching, you can actually go out and we'll donate the stuff to you for the usage. And that was the first time I was ever able to photograph a load sharing surface implemented, because I'd write it and it would be ignored. Again, maybe you don't have that same process. It's like we say, don't wrap the trunk with geotextile fabric and nail 4x2s to a bit of hoop strap around the tree. We say, don't do that because it's going to damage the tree. Use something better than that, and we tell them how to do it. Plywood and styrofoam foam bonded together does a wonderful job. The reason you do that, in case you don't know, and it's an interesting test, Owen, if I were to get a book and put it on your head, or a piece of 4x2 and put it on your head, and then hit it with a hammer, there's this wonderful process of conservation of energy that Newton found out about that means your head will hurt. But if I put something that absorbs in between, and I got the idea when I was riding a bicycle, and I thought, I've got a hard outer shell and a foam inner shell. That's what I need around a tree. I don't need a piece of 4x2. And so we go through this process of telling people all the time to say you should protect it. And I know that's going to get ignored. Why? Because it's easy to. Nelda Matheny came up with a wonderful system, and I happily show you photographs of these things. She said, look, sometimes there's just not enough room to between the tree and what's being built to not be sure that it's not going to get hit. And again, she doesn't like 4x2, so she said, let's put bales of hay up against the tree, and it worked wonderfully. And we've done that on a number of occasions. You drive a couple of star pickets through the bales, you can go 3 high, and if they want to hit the bale, well, at least it's got some givenness of absorption. So again, how you specify things, I think, does influence it, but you also need, in my mind, to show examples. And so some of the examples that we talk about is, for example, when I put down mulch, and everyone here, I assume, recommends mulch around a tree in a tree protection zone. What's the problem with that?
Well, sometimes I do, not always.
Okay. What's the problem with mulch around a tree?
Well, it's soft and it moves.
Yeah, soft and it moves. And 9 out of 10 times, at least a portion of that will go back to being a turf area. Is that right? So when it goes back to a turf area, how are they going to get rid of the mulch?
Excavator.
Yeah, mini excavator. I mean, a mini excavator, let's agree, low footprint, low pressure. We all know that. Every excavator operator's always told me. So I've just said to him, take off your shoe, put your foot down, and let's just see how soft it is. And every now and again, I get one that says, I do that. And I say, well, let's go a little bit more brave. Sit down on the ground, spread your legs apart, and let's use the private parts and see how they go against getting crushed. Excavators do damage to roots. Absorbing roots, the component that takes up water, it has just cellulose. It's got no lignin in it. It's not woody at all, and it's crushed with your fingertips. So if I can crush it with my fingertips, the certainty is that running an excavator backwards and forwards will probably do some damage. So yeah, I get raised with these questions. What can we do? And one of the things that we do is recommend coir logs or mulch in bags. Put down the mulch in bags, make a mat out of mulch bags, and then lift the bags up afterwards. So, again, these are options. Or put down a geotextile fabric, then lay your mulch, and then remove the mulch, pulling back the geotextile fabric as you go, starting from one end and go to the other. So that, again, you're not bringing in equipment. And again, a typical specification for us will be that the tree protection fence is going to go before landscaping work start. I don't know any other way of doing it. Therefore, no equipment can operate within the tree protection zone when the fence is gone. We need to specify that. Now, I specify that and I know what that means. It means that the cement pathway that they're going to pour will have a bogey drive concrete truck back up passing over the tree protection zone. How does that happen? And I think the answer is it happens because the document we write actually doesn't ever get to the developer, to the builder. They don't see it half the time. And I'm not sure I know how to change that. But it's a real dilemma in the development process. That is, the builder would probably do a better job if you got it. The next thing is, I don't know about you, but a typical development site report for me is 20 or 30 or 40 pages long, something in that range. It's a bulky-ish document. And it's not got a pretty picture on every page. So it's probably something that a builder's not going to want to read.
I think the one way to improve that is to use more drawings and put more information on the drawings, because the builders are more likely to look at a drawing than they are to read that document and try and make sense of it.
I agree, Peter. So it's how you separate that out. And if there was a way I could have so I do my specifications in the body of the report, and the next thing is the tree protection plan and the tree location plan, which hopefully is the one plan in most cases. And then those two documents are sequentially, there's a tree schedule and then the tree protection plan. So they've got to get the right stuff together. If there was a way I could have that as a standalone separate document that was included, that would improve. And maybe that's something that we look at doing in the review of the standards. So for those of you who don't know, a case for change has been worked on. It's ready to go to Standards Australia, and Standards Australia have indicated that on the basis of the submission, that it's likely to go to a review of the standard. And for those of you who are concerned about it, or those who see this later and are concerned about it, 12 times trunk diameter stays. So there's no need, from our perspective, the general review has been that's a good starting point. But there certainly are some issues with the standard and what we're getting done, because we're not getting done what we think we should be getting done. Can we get it done? Yes, and it does happen, but it's not a constant and consistent end result. So how do you do that? One of those things, Peter, you've just raised is we've got this this process of having visual things, and a builder wants to read a plan. Peter Caster, and he says, look, we really should be giving all our tree protection plans as CAD or drawing files. And I would say, you look, in theory, I agree with that, if it's included in the plan set. Well, hang on a second, the standard says that the tree protection plan should be included in the plan set. So again, that's a sort of a little odd situation that we've got. Does it need to be in drawing format, or does it need to be in PDF format? Does it need to be in CAD? What are thoughts there?
I don't think it needs to be in CAD, because you want somebody to look at it and read it and take notice of it, not necessarily be able to manipulate it.
Yeah, what's the purpose of a plan?
I think it should be in PDF. And I work as a landscape designer as well, so my drawings are my strength with my reports. And yeah, I really think they should be PDFs.
Yeah, just a PDF is fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, look,
as long as there's a clear scale and they can see what they're doing, a clear scale with the drawing and the tree protection, that's the main thing.
Yeah, look, and I'm not so sure that I even hold to the clear scale, David, in the sense that when I'm building a building, I've got to be plus or minus, less than 1% error on height on a wall. I can't have any more than 1% lane. So, I've got to have some degree of accuracy. When I'm doing a tree protection zone, if it's 300 mils one way or 300 mils the other way, it's probably not a big issue. The problem is I'm not getting the 300 mils either side. I'm getting 3 meters either side. That is, if you draw a tree protection zone that is 6 meters by 6 meters, it's not uncommon to see that as a 2 meter by 2 meter. And that's a fair inconsistency.
Oh, yeah, totally.
You can, what I will quite often do when I meet the builder is I'll take a can of spray out and I'll spray on the ground where he needs to put his fences.
And that's great if the builder gets you in and says, I want to do this correctly.
Yeah.
He's got to have the document you want. And it's in there. It's in the development package because it's been approved and the consent authority has issued documentation. But it's one of, probably 120 odd pages. And, again, I'm not suggesting that all builders fit into the category of not necessarily being good readers, but certainly a percentage of them don't fit into it, and a percentage of those that get to run sites fit into that category. So it's making sure that it happens. And one of the things that you will have, David, if you haven't had David Bidwell, if you haven't had it yet, not David G, you'll get the hi, we've just finished on a development site. We need you to come out and sign off on the tree protection, so that the certifier can issue a occupation certificate. You think, well, hang on a second here. What happened before the development started? When were the fences put in? Have you had that happen yet?
No,
It's not too far away. It's one of the early experiences you will get.
Plenty before where I've signed off on, looking at, well, plenty, but several signing off on what they've done before the event, before it commences. So I've had a couple of successful ones there where they put in the protection either according to my specs or specs from other arborists. I'm coming in as project arborist. Someone else has done the AIA maybe. So, yeah.
Yeah. So yes, look, if we're going in and you're auditing at the whole points that have been put down, or the critical points, or whatever they're called in the particular report that has been written, they're the same thing. That's great. That's what we want.
Yeah.
And again, a part of what we do as an arborist is facilitate the builder in doing things right. So a good builder who understands what you need to do and how to do it is a lot easier to manage than somebody who's just trying to get a tick. Yeah. And for many, that's the case. And a part of that, again, comes to the fact that they don't value the tree. You're all in different places. Rob, you're in Melbourne, is that right?
Yeah, I'm in Melbourne, yeah.
Yeah. David, you're in Sydney. Owen, you're Sydney. Vicky?
Yeah.
It sounds like Vicky. And David G?
I'm in Sydney.
Sydney?
Yep, Sydney. Okay.
So the situation is different by different areas, obviously. But in many cases, what we're doing doesn't transfer into a real situation because we have a certifier who doesn't care. And the consent authority can do nothing, particularly if you're dealing with, Rob, we've got this unusual piece of legislation in New South Wales called compliant development. It's been a nightmare over the last, 3 or 4 years. I think it's on revision about 35. So it's a piece of legislation that was so appallingly written that it has had nothing but constant reviews to try and sort out the problem. At the current stage, it says that you can have a compliant development with a tree that's more than 3 meters away, but if it's more than 3 meters away and it's greater than, I think it's 8 meters in height, then you must follow the Australian standard. And a couple of years ago, I was in NCAT discussing this and saying, well, I'm not sure what that means because the Australian standard is not a specification. It's a standard, it's a process. It doesn't tell you where the fence is. If it's that I've got to put the fence at 12 meters, I'm going to have problems because the neighbors are going to have a fence through their lounge room and they're not going to be very happy about that. So, we have legislation that doesn't understand what the standard is. And who's heard the phrase prune tree to the Australian standard? Anyone ever heard that? Yes. Anyone apart from me ever used it? Okay. I think about it. You can't prune the tree to the Australian standard. It's not a specification.
You can prune it you can prune it in accordance with the recommendations of the Australian standard.
Yeah, I'm not even sure about that, Peter. You can make your final cuts as illustrated. I'm not sure that there's much more that you can do because the standard talks about a process. So the Australian Standard for Protection of Trees on development sites is the same. It's a standard that talks about a process. It's a procedural standard. It is not a set of specifications. So it doesn't say 12 times trunk diameter and then we stop. It says, here's what you need to do. If you're going to come closer than 12 times trunk diameter, and it's more than a minor encroachment, you need to demonstrate the tree will remain viable. Interestingly enough, if it's less than a 10% incursion, you don't need to demonstrate the tree will remain viable. Why is that? Anyone want to guess at it?
Yes, that's the figure that's been nominated as anything less than 10%. It will have sufficiently minor impacts on the tree that it doesn't matter.
Yeah, we accept that 12 times trunk diameter actually has an effect on a tree, and there is a research paper that shows that as a perceivable impact that's short term. That was done by a New Zealand researcher using live oaks in Florida as his research with no intervention at all. So it's just cut the roots and let's see what happens. And there was some reduction in growth during the following years. So we do know that at 12 times trunk diameter, we're having some impact still. But that impact is so small that we needn't worry about it. And so we've got this 10% incursion rule. And again, whilst that sounds nice in theory, it means we can come in 10% on a tangent, which I think from memory is about 8.4 times trunk diameter as a tangent going across past a tree. So we have a round circle. Let me see if I can illustrate. Round circle. We can cut across that round circle at 8.4 times radius, and we're at about 10% of the area. Because at 8.4 times, we're cutting closer than if we're cutting an extra half a metre off all the way around, would have probably less impact on the tree, but would be taking more of the area out. So they're guidelines. They're not meant to be, at this point, we've finished. So certainly in terms of what we have in our reports, the goal is demonstrate that the tree will remain viable. And at 12 times trunk diameter, it's not an issue. And at 10% incursion, it's not an issue. Does anyone know how we got to 12 times trunk diameter?
No.
It's interesting. The original British standard, which was the first standard for protection of trees, you could have anything from 6 to, I think, about 12 times. They settled on 10 in the review and said, look, 10 times trunk diameter and an incursion on one side that I forget what they've got at the current stage, that allows for you to come closer on one side if you're not going on the others. And that was great. That went to America. And you can figure out the problem, can't you? 1 inch equals 10 inches. 10 inches equals 100 inches. Hell, what's 100 inches? It's 8 foot, 4 inches. But you have to be able to divide by 12. And you can see the average American doesn't have 12 digits. So that makes it difficult for them. So they said, look, let's make it 1 inch to 12, and then that means we get 1 foot for every inch. So we increase the protection area from 100 square units to 144 square units, 44% more protection area, just simply to deal with the fact that Americans can't do mathematics. And it's by their commitment to become metricized 40 odd years ago, they're still not there. So that's the history of the 10 times and 12 times trunk diameter. So we ended up at 12 times trunk diameter. How about the question then of root growth? I mean, is it going to be the same in the UK as it is in Australia? Is it going to be the same responses in Northern Scotland as it is in Cairns? What do you think?
Depends on the soil type, species, temperature, a whole range of things.
Yes, lots of variables. So again, you can see why the standard was never meant to be a specification.
And also how urban the setting of the tree is. You know, if it's heavily paved around it, who knows where the roots might be going anyway. So it might be very asymmetrical, the root growth. So that's factors that have to be considered.
Yeah, probably less so from pavement as a thing, more so perhaps from road, where you start getting, 200 or 300 mils of excavation to form the road, and that obviously has to have an impact. But I'm forever
where you might have a retaining wall, for instance.
Yeah, with a footing, and you may have a basement car park, which we're now getting more and more of, and they all have an impact on the tree and its root morphology. So again, another good reason, David, why the standard is not meant to be a set of specifications, but a set of guidelines as to how we are to go through the process. And so we go through that process of assessing the tree in the earlier stage, and then the next part of the process is communicating that information to the end reader. And somewhere in that process, it's not clear enough, because our builders are getting the material, and then the builders are finding that hard to follow. So why a consent authority ever allows a tree protection project to go ahead without a drawing is beyond my ability to understand, because when someone says to me, fence the tree protection zone as per the Australian standard, I am not sure what that means. I don't know whether that means a round circle at 12 times trunk diameter, or the equivalent in a square, or whether it means that they can't actually build the building that's just been approved. So that's why the drawing is important. Vicky is using, I assume you're using a CAD to draw your drawings and then saving it as a PDF, Vicky, is that right?
I use Vectorworks and save as a PDF.
Yeah. You can use Word. You can use pen and paper. I did a development 2 years ago for an architect who still drew everything by hand, which was just an amazing experience.
I've had one this year, all drawn by hand. Yeah,
amazing that anyone would still do that, but they are out there still doing it. So effective, yes. Communicated. The building's being built. It's a magnificent building, but why you do it by hand is without my understanding. But yes, I've seen people take a plan, mark it up, scan it, and insert it into their report, and that's perfectly acceptable. The purpose is to communicate. And so we're communicating that, we're achieving the end goal. Peter and I were talking during the week, and one of the things that we said is in the new study material for new diploma students, there's a requirement in the report writing unit to consider and balance alternate views. And there are alternate positions when it comes to tree protection and what's going to happen, just like there is with much of arboriculture. I mean, could we agree that most of us don't have 30 or 40 references in an arboricultural impact assessment report? Could agree with that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was beginning to think I was substandard. If I get 4 or 5 references in an arboricultural impact assessment report, apart from the standard or standards, because they'll usually refer at some stage to the 4373, but if I can get 4 or 5 references, I think that's a pretty good report. Who would say that that's pretty well the norm?
Yeah,
good. So again, there's not a lot of research. There's limited information out there, and one of the things that Peter and I discussed was trying to make some of that available as papers. And Peter, we put a couple in the Dropbox, haven't we? We put Hamilton in there, and
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So there's lots of stuff in little bits and pieces out there. But when you read it, and I read Hamilton, and I like quoting Hamilton, and I'll critique him as well. A lot of what Hamilton does is anecdotal, based on his experience. he doesn't actually cite that much research. So he says, seldom will this happen, but based on what? And then we've already agreed that the environment in which the tree is growing will vary remarkably. So that is that impact going to be the same when we put it in Sydney, in Melbourne? If we put it in Melbourne in a drought, will it be the same as if we put it in Sydney this year? I mean, in Sydney this year, I'm pretty sure that if you cut roots on most development sites, the trees just started to grow new roots. It's been a wonderfully wet year. But what do you do when it's dry? And the standard is silent on irrigation. The standard is silent on timing. So if I want to cut roots on a plane tree, I don't know who here's heard Mick Rogers talk on root pruning on plane trees. Is anyone? He did it at TreeNet a few years ago. It's just an absolute rip-roarer. First order lateral roots at the trunk to stop property damage. Done during winter, limited indication of any stress. Done during the middle of summer, there was stress. Does that surprise anyone?
No.
No, and yet the standard is silent on it. And so one of the things that we need to think about in our Arborist reports are we going to talk about these things? Are we going to talk about irrigation? Are we going to talk about timing? Are you bold enough to say, look, this development's a really good development, provided that we don't cut roots during the middle of summer. I want it done during late autumn to late winter. I don't want early spring. I hate early spring as a pruning time for roots. It's a phoenix palm. Well, I don't want it to be done during winter. I want it to be done during the warmer months when the root growth is most active. So I'd rather during, October, November, December for a palm. So again, nothing fits into a set of specifications. We've really got to go at it with information. And from what you've said, you're all like me. You've all sat there and found it difficult to find supporting references for it. You can cite Matheny and Clark's Protection of Trees and Development Sites, or whatever the text is called. And it's got some wonderful stuff in it. And then it's got lots of images that almost contradict half of the text, where things are going right when they shouldn't be and things are going wrong when they should be. And I guess that's a part of what we've got. We've got a whole pile of unknown out there. What I will say is I think that if you can illustrate things for a builder, they'll understand it better. So a drawing of a fence around a tree is not the same as a photograph of 5 panels by 5 panels around a tree with mulch in place. I think that as individuals, we understand visual images better than we do illustrations. Can we agree on that?
Yes.
Here's a dilemma. I know, Peter, you were a student at Wollongbar. Did you do the Sydney trip?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you find it hard finding good tree protection examples?
Yeah, we found lots of tree protection examples, but not very many good ones.
And so that says what we're doing as an industry. It's not necessarily that we're at fault, but somewhere or other it's breaking down. And I guess over the years of teaching the diploma course, I've probably come across over 1,000 development sites. And I think I've had 4 sites where I've got good photographs, where I've thought, oh, wow, this demonstrates. One was in Glebe, where there was a load sharing surface around a fig, and I thought, just so nice to see. But in most cases, I get the opposite, like the big wheel ruts going past the tree, or the excavator running over the root system of the tree whilst I'm waiting for the council to come to the site to verify that the tree protection stuff is going on correctly. And you're thinking, no, I give up.
Well, the biggest problem in Melbourne, anyway, I think, is that there's no penalty for contravening the conditions that are set out. And so builders do whatever they like because there's no penalty.
And I think that's an ongoing problem. In New South Wales, then Chief Commissioner, now Justice Moore, made very plain that a bond wasn't permissible on tree protection or on the preservation of trees on development sites. And I don't think that position of the court has changed in New South Wales. So we've got a situation where you can't have some surety up beforehand. Now, having said that, consent authorities regularly ask for a security or bond. And that's because they're smart enough to be ballsy and be able to ask for it, knowing that the average person is not going to rock down the Land Environment Court and say, hang on a second here, we don't agree with this, let's have this bond removed. So there are certainly councils that are asking for bonds. But yes, there's no consequence. And the consequence, and I can think of probably my best example, was a 600 mil diameter cedar in a site in Ashfield. We moved the tree, I can't remember, 20 odd years ago. It was probably a $30,000 transplant, something like that. And I get a phone call about 9 months later saying, look, council's concerned about the tree, can you come and have a look? So I rock back to the site and the tree's brown, it's dead. And the first thing I noticed was the concrete right up to the base of it. And I said, why is there concrete all the way around the tree? And they said, oh, the trucks kept on getting bogged. I said, but why were the trucks driving there? You're left with a tree protection zone and a fence and an irrigation system. What wasn't? Well, the end consequence was the tree died and the council said, yes, we're awfully upset about it. And I said, look, you might be able to move something in that's about 300 mils in diameter. It's probably going to set you back about 20 odd grand. But that's about as big as we can get back in. And the council said, yes, we'll accept a 45 litre specimen. And there's good reason for that. Who here likes the price of their real estate in Melbourne or Sydney? Anyone?
Only if you're selling.
Well, you got to buy somewhere else. That's the problem. So yeah, all of this does add to the cost of real estate. Why would you want to do it? The answer is trees are worth good money. Peter, can you remember that figure for the health benefits of a tree per square metre? It's about 30 something or other dollars, is it?
Oh, well, it depends on how you calculate it. But, I think we were talking about $40 a square metre.
$35 to $40 a square metre health benefits per metre square of canopy. Well, that's not a insignificant amount. You start talking about a tree that's got a 10 metre radius.
That's per year.
Per year, yes. Let's say 5 metre radius. That's 25 times 3, 75. 75, that's at least 3 odd grand's worth of health benefits a year. Over a 10-year period, that's $30,000 worth of health benefits. That's not a small amount of money. And yet we're prepared to throw it out. So that's a problem. And one of the things that I do see as an issue with development sites from the developer's point of view is they want to know what they can get rid of to get maximum yield. Who would agree with that?
Yeah.
And the problem with that is I take out a 600 mil diameter tree and I put in a 45 litre tree, and we're another, 40 years, 35 years before we're at par again. And then I get consent authorities say to me, but Mark, the number of trees that we've got is declining. Well, no wonder your canopy is declining, because you're not requiring any sort of like for like. Who's heard of the San Mateo tree replacement program? A guy called Dave Doctor popularized it. I think it was first proposed by a guy called Bailey Hudson, who was a rather radical arborist and one stage president of the International Society. And the San Mateo program says the canopy of the tree that you're removing, if it's one of their listed trees, which is their endemic trees, must be replaced within 10 years. If it can't be replaced on the site, it must be replaced off-site. That's a really interesting concept in my mind. that we allow any trees to go without somehow or other ensuring that the canopy is compensated for.
Some LGAs do that. So, for example, around here, Byron Council has a no net vegetation loss policy, and they stipulate a replacement ratio. So for an ordinary valuable tree, it will be 5 to 1, it can be 10 to 1. And Tweedshire Council doesn't have a stem ratio, but they still have a replacement that boils down to replacing the canopy. So you need to think about how much canopy is lost and then how you can adequately replace that.
Yeah, look, we have that. And then I see things like Tristaniopsis lorina luscious being planted as the replacement for Eucalyptus saligna or, Eucalyptus grandis. And I think, it's probably not ever going to happen in my lifetime or my children's lifetime and maybe my grandchildren. But yes, it's a beautiful tree, although having all clonal materials never my ideal planting process. But yes, we have the same in some of our councils. So for example, next council across to me, Penrith, has a 5 to 1 planting ratio. The dilemma is, where do you put those 5 trees? And it's all very well to say I want to remove that wonderful, I'm just trying to think of a medium-sized tree that you'd all know. Let's say you'd never get rid of a Moreton Bay fig, but let's just say you wanted to get rid of a Moreton Bay fig. Where am I going to get space to put in 5 more Moreton Bay figs on any development site? And so we have to come up with a method at some stage or other of dealing with that, I think, as society. It's not us as arborists, but we're the ones that need to say, hey, look, you can't remove 10 trees to do a development and then replace 50 trees back on the site. It's never going to happen. Who from the Sydney people, and I'm sorry, Rob, that cut you out, who's seen the wonderful development site on Victoria Road where they've kept the black butt? Catriona.
Yeah.
Absolutely spectacular tree protection where lots of space has been given. And the Phoenix palms were kept, and that's great because they're easy to keep. But there are lots of trees cut down. Where are those trees? They're gone. So we kept one tree that was 60, 70 years old and done a really great job of it, but we're losing canopy all the same. And I don't know whether you're aware of it, but a gentleman called Tepper did some calculations. A very clever man. He worked for the Department of Agriculture. And he worked out that we needed to get back about 1/3 of our original canopy in order to get most of the eco-service benefits out of it. So we want to get to about 30%, 33% tree canopy cover in Sydney. Tepper wrote that in 1897.
Wow.
Harris still talks about or still references his use of shade and protection. We really haven't achieved it, have we? And if you're in my end of the world, Blacktown Council's soared rapidly down to 17% canopy. And I'm just looking at a project in the Middle East at the moment where they're plummeting along to 1% canopy cover. Now, 1% canopy cover in the middle of the Middle East is not too bad in the sense that they started with almost 0 and they've gone up, but we've gone backwards in 130 years. We're not gone forward in spite of planting. The reason why is we cut down a 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old tree. I'm on an old farm here, the old farm of the first Surgeon General, John Harris, and there are 60 and 70-year-old trees that are regrowth here. And this area is marked for future subdivision, and those trees will get cut down, every one of them. Rob, as I get to North Melbourne, the northern side of Melbourne, not North Melbourne itself, but the northern side of northern suburbs, it's just devastating. Eucalypts with metre and a half diameter trunks are removed to allow concrete slabs, and you're going to love this, black or dark grey tile roofs, because apparently they're good. Okay. And for those of you who haven't seen it, New South Wales state government is now thinking about passing legislation to prohibit the use of dark coloured roofs, because some research had shown them, done by University of New South Wales, I believe, has shown them that houses with roofs that are dark colour are hotter. Someone actually had to do that as research. Can you believe that? It just is, in my mind, sad that somebody had to research to figure that out. There was a reason why we used to use zinc aluminum roofs. Does anyone know what that reason is?
Would that be reflective?
High reflective index, yeah, which meant you didn't get as much heat. Nobody would have ever painted their roof dark grey. That have 50 years ago that have laughed at you. Why do we do it now?
Because we've got air conditioners.
We've got air conditioning. And looking at you, okay, David G and Owen, you don't know what I'm talking about. David Bidwell, you've got no idea what I'm talking about. But Peter and Rob and I and Vicky will probably do. We lived in houses that didn't have air conditioning when we grew up. Is that I mean, you might have been wealthy family, but
you could hear the rain on the roof too.
Yeah. Yeah. And when it got hot, you opened the windows. Is that right, Rob?
That's it.
And you had cars. You find this cars with quarter windows. Well, David's got the thing, quarter windows that you open up, because cars didn't have air conditioning either. I didn't have my first air conditioned car until I was in my mid to late 20s. Is everyone in that same us oldies? That's what it's like. So, yeah, it's changed the footprint as a result. So how do we communicate to a builder? Well, I think it's a concerted effort, not just from the arborist. I think we need to communicate well, but I think we also need to work better with the consent authorities. And sometimes it's a bit of an us and them mentality. Who would agree with that? Who's ever had that experience?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be. It should be an us and us. We've both got the same end goal, which is to have lots of green trees. Are we as consultants making mistakes? I think so. I think I do. Are consent authorities making mistakes? I think so. Collectively, we should be able to come to some resolution. So hopefully the revision of the standard will help improve some of that and make for some synergistic processes. Well, I'm going to just share my screen if that's okay by you guys. I'm just going to...
I made you the host, Mark, so you should be able to.
Yeah, I can do it. We're just opening up a report that I'm currently working on. Can you guys see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just showing you that in terms of communicating, you can communicate visually using Word as a, and I'm not saying you have to use Word. Peter, you're using...
I use a different program.
Yeah, what one are you using again?
Publisher, it's called.
Publisher.
There's a suite of programs. There's a word processor, a drawing program, and basically a Photoshop equivalent.
So it doesn't matter what you're using. There's ways of communicating what you want. So all I'm doing now is just using an insert and a drawing tool with Word, and I'm being really rough. If I wanted to do this with more detail, I'd zoom in and I'd follow the lines a lot better. But if I wanted to say to somebody, I want you, and in this case, I want him to put down some fertilizer, which is unusual for me to recommend. But this tree has been transplanted. It's a Brachychiton rupestris, and it's just a little on the pale side. So there we are. I can communicate that visually, even with a photograph, without doing anything more complex than using Word. I know what I want to do. Got to just move you guys out of the way. Transparency, I want it, and I want the fill color to be yellow. And I can say, hey, fertilize that area. I can say fence that area. I can say that's my tree protection zone. And I can say, so I can do it on an image. I can do it on a plan. it doesn't matter how you do it. The point is it clear? And certainly there have been tree protection projects I've worked on where the site image is what I've marked up, photographs from the site rather than a drawing, because that can be understood. You know, if I want to put a fence in here, I can draw a fence in along that line. I don't necessarily have to sit there on a plan. Perfectly good to do it on a plan. Nothing wrong with doing it on a plan. It's just trying to say visual things are understood. It definitely needs to be visual. So if it's on a plan, it can be on an aerial image. And by the way, Peter, I don't know whether we discussed this earlier, but putting numbers on plans, one of the things I had real problems with in the early days is making them stand out. And a young fellow called Sean Talent, who I've got a lot of time for, Sean got really smart. He said, if you just do the number with no color, no fill in a text box, and then highlight the number, it'll make it stand out. So that's all that is a number with a highlight on it. So nothing more, but it certainly makes them stand out. And for those of you who don't know, this is Metro Maps. There's Sydney Siders. Anyone know Metro Map? This is their near infrared photography, and near infrared photography is used to test plant stress. Okay. Now you can go to a full infrared camera. I've got one of those in the drawer behind me. But this is really neat because it just gives you a point in time. And if you're a near maps user, Metro Maps is a little cheaper, but nowhere near the quality of near maps, but the two go together quite well. And the near infrared can be really useful. This brachychiton here is just getting a tanning. This one here is not so good. This one here is doing a lot better. This one here is doing a lot better, but both these have got a problem with Kurrajong weevils. Talking of which, Kurrajong weevils, Peter, do you mind if we just ask the question about diseases?
I think it's a good idea.
It just came up because of discussing it. I just finished writing a unit for Melbourne Polytech on diagnosing tree diseases. And I said to Peter, I wonder whether whether we should be getting together periodically to discuss tree diseases. Does anyone else find it difficult when they're diagnosing diseases, knowing what they're looking at, having any idea where to start, knowing how to manage it? Would getting together and discussing a few diseases every month be something that some of you might be interested in?
Yeah.
Yes, I would.
Yeah, so that's your answer, Peter. So we don't know when we're going to schedule it or whether we will schedule it, but it is difficult to go through the processes, and I often get really frustrated with not knowing what I'm looking at and not knowing where I'm going next. And I tell a true story of being in Las Vegas. I got pulled into a project over there, and lying down on the root balls of trees that had been transplanted. So that's how I got in there, as a transplant expert, not as a smart arborist. And lying down on these root plates, just bawling, thinking, I have no idea where we're losing these trees. And for those of you who find it interesting, the cause of the problem was Phytophthora cinnamomi. Can you believe it? You get Phytophthora in deserts, particularly when your irrigation system for a golf course feeds the drainage back into the irrigation dam. Mm-hmm. It just was brilliant. And it was in part by chance. I kept on seeing roots that looked like they were being damaged by pathogenic fungi. So pathogens attack what sort of tissue? Anyone?
Living tissue.
Living tissue, you got it. Living tissue. And so the cambium was being attacked, and the root outer bark on a small woody root would just slide straight off. I think, yep, okay, I got a pathogen, I got a root pathogen. What's this bloody root pathogen and why is it there? So yeah, okay. Well, that's something that Peter and I will discuss more and look at. And then maybe every now and again we can get somebody in who's an expert again, just like Peter did a few months ago, to look at particular diseases or particular information that might be useful to us. And then, of course, it came up in my discussion because I said to Peter, in writing this document, I've got thousands of pictures, and a lot of them came from students who'd bring in diseases into class and say, what the hell is this? And that was just such a wonderful opportunity. I said to them, I really miss it. I miss it because you miss the unusual things you don't get to see. And I miss it because it was so educational for me as well as it was for them. So the question is, could we do something in that sort of format where you take a photograph of a disease, you take a photograph of something that you've seen, you lay it on the table and say, hey, this is what it is, or you lay it on the table and say, I've got no idea where to go with this one, or is this something I should be concerned about? And how did you find that exercise, Peter?
Oh, I thought it was great. I got a lot from people bringing those samples in as well.
And saw some amazing things that weren't even diseases of trees, but were just wonderful examples of nature. I mean, some of the beetles that Bill brought in, for example, in your class were just amazing.
Well, a very striking example for me was Phlinus noxious, brown root rot. I had no idea that it occurred on the northern rivers until one of the students brought in a sample, and we determined that's what it was. And then from there, I became interested in it and started finding it all over the place.
Yeah, and it's rampant, as you will point out, through the northern rivers, right down to Grafton, and it's probably going to be lower. And, I had a similar example, and David, you might relate, David Bidwell, you might relate to this, playing around with a transplant that was going horribly wrong. And one of the things that went horribly wrong with it is when we were doing the pruning of the canopy, we observed that it had lesser coconut weevil, which causes collapse of the head. And it was at the Botanic Gardens. And, we thought that it was purely a tropical disease, but if you're a lesser coconut weevil, the temperatures are moderate enough right on the harbour to allow you to breed without being a problem.
So what species was it, Mark?
The palm was on a Phoenix canariensis, but it will attack any of the palms, and I suspect it was probably what nailed your Jabea in the end. And it was just blindsided everyone because the palms find a move, there's no problems until you have got it on the ground and you're looking at the head and you're thinking, oh, crap. What are we going to do now? Do we go into a program of treating every year for the rest of the life of the palm? And treating with chemicals in the Botanic Gardens is something that you guys really loved to do, wasn't it, David?
Back in the day, yeah.
Yeah, almost never. Want to try and avoid chemicals if we can. And we want to try and be nice and environmentally friendly. So, okay, that's something we can look at. I'm pretty sure I showed you in the first day we did what a typical arboricultural impact assessment looks like for me. And I showed you good examples and bad examples. Yep. Does everyone remember that?
Yep.
Yep. And I guess that's what I'm talking again. Why are they there? It's to try and communicate to the builder what I'm talking about. If I'm talking about using the bag technique, I include photographs of the bag technique. If I'm saying, look, this is a palm that could really easily be protected with bales of hay, I'll show pictures of the bales of hay. And if you're saying, look, I don't have those, I'm happy to make those photographs available on the Dropbox so you can go ahead and show people what we're talking about. Would that help at all?
Absolutely. Yep.
Who's got photographs of a load bearing surface, like plastic road plate over mulch?
Not my own photos. I do have them.
Yeah. Okay. So it's, yeah. And that's, as I said, I've seen it 3 times, twice. Thank you, Wallara Council, for doing a job and blowing so much money. It was ridiculous on protecting some trees. And then once Sydney Council on a site in Glebe, and that was just fortuitous. Apart from that, it's something I've virtually never seen. A nice mulch tree protection zone. The best shot I've got of that is from a guy who actually didn't do it until he got his pins. Land Environment Court, and he said, well, I'm going to make the Land Environment Court happy, so I'll do everything now. And of course, the court was fine with that and signed everything off. So yeah, if you would like, send Peter an email, let him know what you want to have put in the Dropbox, and I'll source out some images and throw them in there to help communicate better. Any other thoughts on how to make a better? So we need some more papers to go in. So if you have a good paper, or if you have a good reference that you use, and I'll throw another one up there in the next few days, and one on concrete. Has everyone got a copy of McLeod and Cram? I know you have, Pete.
Yeah.
McLeod and Cram talks about root pressures. When we're doing buildings and they're close to a tree, or we've got a retaining wall that's going to be close to the tree, we'll talk about making sure the engineering is appropriate. And we cite McLeod and Cram, and he says somewhere between 800 and 900 kilopascals, so roughly a megapascal of pressure exerted by roots, which is consistent with roots in the built environment, which say at about 2.5 megapascals, all root growth is inhibited completely. And at about 2 megapascals, root growth is significantly hindered.
Hang on, Mark. I'm not sure what you mean by that when you say that at a certain pressure, the roots are inhibited. Aren't you talking about the growth of new roots?
Growth or expansion of roots. So if, for example, I were to put, and I've got a sample of it in my thing, if you want, I'll photograph it. If I were to put some coir flute on the ground, the roots started growing through the coir flute. Can you picture that? Or through a pipe, plastic pipe. Mm-hmm. It'll eventually constrict itself. Through a straw, it'll have a hard time. It'll eventually constrict itself because the pressure exerted back against the root by the ring tension of the item will stop it. Well, if I've got a root growing through compacted soil that I've compacted around it, we can stop root growth. And we can stop it both secondary, that is thickening, and elongation. And McLeod and Cram do that based on what's called the turgid pressure. They're saying that when a cell expands itself all the way up, how much pressure can that exert? And so that gets to around about the megapascal. It can be greater on some species. There's a couple of references that talk about 1200 MPa or 1200 kilopascals or 1.2 MPa, and that's a range. But there's a limit. There's a physical limit. At one stage, roots will start to develop spirals. They'll start to spiral around. Let me just stop the sharing. Yeah, so roots can actually develop a spiral, and there's actual video footage of this developing, and I've got some of these spiral roots that we've collected over the years. They'll develop a corkscrew type activity to exert extra pressure through harder surfaces. I mean, it's amazing when you think about it. So they can get some mechanical advantage, but at around about that 2 megapascals, it starts to get really iffy, and at a 2.5, it's just impossible. So you could put a concrete barrier in it to stop roots growing, or you could simply compact the ground to that level of compaction, and that stops it. So McLeod and Cram talk about that, and we go the reverse. We say, look, we want to protect buildings. If you're going to build a retaining wall, it needs to be able to withstand those pressures. Otherwise, that retaining wall is not fit for purpose. It really isn't with that tree there. And particularly when we start talking about, and Dave Bidwell, I know you got a lot out in your end of the world, Vicky, you'll be dealing with the same as ficus. Ficus and built structures, just a nightmare. So we really need to be communicating, look, this is something to design. So in my development site reports, there'll be a section called design issues. In the design issues, I discuss things that are going to be needing to be thought about by the design team. One of them's guttering. Who here would agree that leaves and gutters is a major issue?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I say, design a guttering system that's appropriately designed. And there are several things like tordial downpipes, siphon suckers. There are spouts. The Australian standard says you put a spout on a gutter if the front of the gutter is higher than the back of the gutter to stop it going under the eaves. Try and find the spouts. The standard says you install them, but where do you buy them from when no one sells them? Why does no one sell them? Because most gutters get put up contrary to the standard. And if you don't believe me, come to my place at the moment. You can rip the fascia off on one side of the house now because of the amount of water that's got back in behind. In spite of the fact that the standard says you shouldn't do that. And that's why you'll see some of the gutters have got those nice little slots in them. That's their way of coming over it. And if you've ever seen those, they fill up with material as they start to overflow, and that's it, they stop. So, so I talk about gutters as a system because I just think that if you are going to build and there are existing trees that are being retained, and a two-story structure or greater, then the gutter system should be appropriate. So that's one of the things. The second thing then I talk about there is the pressures exerted. So if there's going to be something like a driveway past a tree, can you construct a driveway so that it's never lifted? What do you think?
Only if it was a flexible material like a gravel or something, I guess, that would give. It's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, look, a flexible surface will work, and gravel's lovely and I love it. But you can put a concrete pathway over a fig root system and it'll never break if you engineer it appropriately. And the secret is, again, the pressure exerted by roots. So it has to be enough ability to resist it and enough friction to the ground to stop it from lifting, which means you're going to put some piers down, and those piers create drag. It's like pulling out a fence post. So you put enough piers in, or ground anchors, helical ground anchors, you can put a path over fig roots, and as the fig roots develop, they'll flatten. How do I know? I've moved enough figs in situations underneath driveways where I've got enough flattened roots to know what they do. And so you can build permanent structures that aren't going to be damaged. And so we'll talk about that if it's a tree with a root system that's particularly fast growing or that tends to grow near the surface, something like a liquid amber. So look, you might want to think about how you're going to design what you're going to design. So that's where we talk about design issues, as well as issues that I have with the design, which might be something like, the orientation of the buildings, it could be improved, or, those sort of things that I'd like the design team to change, but where the design team has said, look, we're going to submit it as it is. I'll usually flag those in those comments. And that goes into my specifications as well. My specifications will say, and typically say, something like, consider installing an appropriate guttering system to prevent problems from leaves. Interestingly, some councils have come up with this idea that you can reduce that problem by pruning branches overhanging a building. They're obviously somebody who have no understanding of aerodynamics at all, because you watch an average eucalyptus leaf in the wind, it'll actually rotate. There's a kid's toy that does exactly the same thing, and it can fly. As it starts to rotate, it will take off. So you can have a eucalyptus leaf land 200, 300 meters from the tree. So I think designing better gutters is an appropriate piece of feedback. Does it happen? I've yet to see it happen. But at least I've covered it so that in 10 years' time, when somebody falls from the second-story building cleaning their gutters, I've said, look, it's your fault in part because you should have been doing this. Make sense?
Yeah.
Any questions on the things we've gone over? So we'll communicate back to Peter with things that you'd like to have put in the Dropbox. If you haven't got access to the link, ask Peter for a link to the Dropbox. You can go in there, copy stuff from there. It's the aim of it's to help improve what we do. Let's see if we can make some improvements. If you've got thoughts about the Australian standard, by the way, the case for change, we're just waiting for ACRE to finish their comments on it in completion. But there's certainly about 70 or 80 odd items that are, most of them are just fairly minor. Some of them are a little bit larger. Things like there is no discussion of timing. Phenology of things really should be being discussed. There's no discussion of the benefits of irrigation, and the standard it needs to make clear that it's not a specification, but rather a process. And therefore, the standard itself is not the basis of stopping a development. It's the basis for communicating about a process that may stop the development. And so all of that needs to be just clarified. I mean, I think one of the biggest things that, and I know we said it in the first one, and Rob, I know you had discussed it with us, is no, you can't do that. It's going to be closer than 10 times trunk diameter. You're not allowed to do that. That's exactly when the arborist needs to be in there and talking about it. And I had a young fellow, and I'll leave this as my last one, young fellow, Colin Curtis is a delightful guy, who does a lot of route mapping. Why, I don't know. It's just a horrible job. Who here has done some route investigation work, dug out? Yeah. Who likes it? Who's used an air knife and gone there and just come home looking like they've come from deepest, darkest Sudanese countries with black dirt all over them?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All over their teeth and right up their nostrils. Okay, so there's nothing pleasant about it.
We've got councils that specify hydro excavation, and I've done a few pipeline jobs in nature strips where you go through the TPZs of all the nature strip trees, and I've banned hydro. I think it does far more damage than an excavator.
Rob, you're absolutely right, and I'll give you why you're right based on what we've been discussing tonight. 860 megapascals, which is McLeod and Cram's mid-range figure that they use, is about 104 or 5 PSI. That means anything more than, let's say, 120 PSI is going to do damage. You take a 3,000 or 4,000 PSI blower and get it too close. So the further away it gets from the root, the less damage it does. The closer it gets, the more damage it's going to do. And you can blow the hell out of them. In fact, I've got one over in the shed that we use for transplanting, and we can cut through the palm of a Phoenix canarensis with it. I'm pretty sure that's not good to do a root excavation with when it's cranked up to 10,000 PSI. So you've got to have low pressure. And that's great if you're dealing with a nice sandy loam. It'll do a wonderful job because you can drop the pressure right down, keep the tip back, and it'll still blow it away. Same with the process of air. As typical air compressor runs at 120 PSI, but when you put it through a small nozzle, you're increasing the pressure. And as you increase the pressure, we're back to ripping the bark off again. So yes, you know, my view is if you're going to go through and hydrovac, you're going to go through and soil knife, where you can, you're better off hand digging because you'll do less damage. You'll fill the root, and yes, you'll put a little nick in with the top of your spade as you go down, but that little nick will recover itself in probably 12 weeks, something like that, depending on the time of the year and the conditions and so on, but let's say on average. So you're better off digging by hand, but it's just a horrible, horrible process to go through. And so if you've got to do it, that's fine, but exactly the same principle applies in terms of working out the pressure. So now you've got that critical pressure, you can start seeing the funny things that happen out there. And there was a wonderful forum many years ago that was run by a madman, and it wasn't me, so it was another madman. And they were talking about injecting pandanus with imidacloprid, Confidor. Confidor is a wettable powder. And they said, well, we'd try to inject and we couldn't get it in. When we got up to about 125 to 130 PSI, it would go in, but we'd get these massive big wounds. And the reason they were getting massive big wounds is the pressure was getting so great, it was rupturing all the cells. The reason it doesn't work is wettable powder is too big to fit through the vascular system. So the way to get imidacloprid in is to dissolve imidacloprid. To dissolve it, you dissolve it in a glycol or sugar alcohol and make it as an injectable form, which is Silver Shield. So those of you who like playing chemistry, you can probably figure out some ways of dissolving imidacloprid. It's just easier to buy Silver Shield. But that's why you use Silver Shield as an injectable and not something like Confidor as an injectable, Rob, down in Melbourne for armleaf beetle. But you can go in and throw in Silver Shield around the ground into the soil. It's systemic, so eventually it gets up into the plant, goes up through the top and kills off the armleaf beetle beautifully. So yes, that's the sort of stuff we'll be talking about if we go and do the disease ones. Okay, so understanding McLeod and Cram is important because it's going to influence how you talk about roots and the trees in the development side. So Peter, can you remind me to put McLeod and Cram there?
I will, yes.
Yeah, it's an unusual paper in that it's hard to source. It was made in limited availability. So, and then add to that James Urban. Everyone knows who James Urban is here, I hope.
Yes.
James Urban says, well, you know, get to 6-inch concrete and it probably can't be lifted by roots. And he's pretty close to right. The reason why, got to get more surface area, get enough surface area and you can. And we can demonstrate that neatly. We can go lift 1/4 of an acre of land at about 20 PSI. How? You get enough surface area, you can lift anything. Okay, so if you've got enough pressure going back the other way and you've got 150 MPa, 32 MPa concrete, and so 150 mils, no, let's go 100 mils thick. 100 mils thick, 32 MPa, 1/10 of that is 3.2 MPa, so our concrete should be good for 3.2 MPa with Rio mesh in it, appropriate meshing. Well, hang on a second. I know that roots can't break that. It's a 100 mil thick slab. So all I've got to do is stop them from lifting it. And so we can go through that process. Does that make sense why something like McLeod and Cram is just a useful thing for a design team to have? You know, we talk about it with retaining walls. You know, don't go and build me a brick retaining wall. I want formed in situ. Oh, but it's more expensive. Yes, but it'll never break. You know, we're not going to have troubles with your wall rotating out. Or typically, and we definitely get it regularly on sites where the engineer says to me, well, the wall's strong enough to prevent rotation. And I say, well, let's just talk about the pressure exerted by tree roots. If it can exert 2 megapascals, how would you feel? I say, no, I can't exert that much. Clay only exerts 0.5 of a megapascal or 0.6 in some conditions. Well, you know, that's what you've been designing for, but you've actually been undesigning by a factor of 3. So, you know, giving them that information will assist them. So, Peter, I'll leave you to make sure that the stuff gets across into the Dropbox. If any of you want something in specific, ask Peter. If you'd like the diagnose thing to happen, again, just send off your support to Peter because he's the one that's going to organise it and make sure that the funding's there to run the videos and have it put up on the available site for later on.
We're talking about calling it tips, if anybody's got a better suggestion. Tree insects, pests and soils.
And Peter challenged me on that. He said, why soils? And my answer was, well, the single biggest disease of trees that I come across, and I know, Rob, you do, and I know, David, you do, is dehydration. Dehydration is a soil problem. I know it sounds crazy, but diseases are anything that affects the normal performance of a tree. And that's an unusual definition for arborists because we've usually come from pests and diseases. But if you think about it, for a long time now, the medical fraternity has had it figured out. A disease is anything that affects the normal function of a person. So alcoholism is a disease. Okay? Alcoholism is not biotic. It's just a behavioral imbalance, horrible behavioral imbalance, but it's a disease. And the same is true of trees. So lack of water. Kim Coder says that growth of a tree, the most single significant chemical for tree growth is water. it accounts for about 80% of tree growth. That's a pretty big chunk. So yes, that's why soils is in there, and diseases, because we're talking about, you know, insect pests. We're talking about the whole gambit of those sort of things. It's not just about the one component of what bug is this? Bugs are great. What fungus is this? Fungus is great, but it's everything, right down to, you know, things like the amazing association. And those of you who got to see Ant Rivers in Canberra a few years ago talking about endophytes, or those of you who've come across Lynn Bodie on decay fungi, endophytes, just massive change in our industry. It's only the last 20 years. And it really is altering the way that we see things. And there are a whole pile of endophytic relationships with tree diseases that are subtle but important. So over fertilizing trees like they do in America, ISA, when you get to hear this, remember I said it, fertilization like you get in America causes rapid growth, often reduces the amount of endophytic relationship, which it means that the leaves are more prone to being affected by the diseases. So yeah, complex stuff. Okay. Well, that, guys, I'll say goodnight, and I'll catch up. If you've got a question, send it off to Pete. Anything that you'd like us to cover at the next meeting?
Is it possible to talk about different tree species and how they react to conditions on development sites?
Awesome question, Vicky. And I think that's a great thing to look at, not just what is different, but what makes different trees respond differently. And I think that's definitely something to look at. And then the next question that goes with that is, of course, how you treat them or how you handle them in order to minimize that impact. And of course, they don't all handle the same. And a guy called Tony Rod, many years ago, made an observation that I thought was brilliant, and that was trees that do well in urbanized areas are often rainforest species and riparian species. And I'll leave you to think about that. And we'll discuss what he was saying and why to address that issue. So we'll definitely cover that at the next development site one, our next report writing war. Sorry, Pete.
Great, thanks.
Any questions, send them to Peter. Any things you want to have discussed, send them off to Pete and he'll get it scheduled.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. Good night.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thanks,
Fantastic.
everyone.
Thank you.
Hey, guys.
Yeah.
Bye.